I'm recording now. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get going on this. Let's see if I can find a working marker.
So you think I'm passing engineering? I got a 58.
You got a what?
I got a 58.
58. I think so. You can still pass. Yeah, my class you can still pass because there's so many things we turn in right at the end of the semester. I do. Yeah. There's tons of extra credit. If you want, I did decide if you want. I don't know how much extra credit. I just decided it this morning randomly. If you want for extra credit, if you memorize John chapter 1, which I'll talk about in a moment, if you memorize what's called the prologue, so it's in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, the Word was with God in the beginning. That whole thing, it's wordy and weird. If you memorize that, I'll give you extra credit. Don't know how much. I haven't decided that yet. So we'll see on that. Probably, my guess is something around 50 points for memorizing that or something. I think I'll do a pretty good chunk for memorizing that. All right, let's go into this. It is Unit 3, Day 1. Unit 3, Day 1. Again, our Bible passage today is John chapters 1 through 7. So we're covering John chapter 1 through 7. I'm going to give the briefest introduction to the book of John. It is the fourth gospel, but here's our objective: to understand gospel subgenres and see how the fourth gospel changes the chronology of Jesus' story. So again, understand gospel subgenres and see how the fourth gospel changes the chronology of the story, of Jesus' story. John is my favorite of the four Gospels. I wish we had more than 3 days to cover it, but we're only spending 3 days on it. We're going to do thirds each day. We're going to go very fast. We're kind of just testing, proving, and refining the skills we've spent all semester so far building. All right, who knows what subgenre means? What is genre? A type. Yeah, usually it's music. I could say genre of people. Right? What is a genre of people? Maybe I say Hispanic people. A subgenre would be any type of smaller category in that category, right? So any category inside of a category, a smaller category. Maybe I say types of I say Hispanic people. I could say Mexicans, Colombians, Puerto Ricans, right? They're all Hispanic. They all fit underneath the different genres. Does that make sense? All right, so subgenre is just something inside of this. So I want to look today real quickly, is gospel subgenres, gospel. I don't want to jinx myself. My handwriting looks really good right now. All right, gospel subgenres in John. We're just going to look at 4 of them. You could probably argue there's some more. We're going to look very quickly at these, because what we're doing for the next 3 days is our last few essays. We're going to do 3 essays about each day. You'll choose one of these 4 genres to write about. I want to be clear, you can only write about each subgenre once. So if you choose the first one that you find and you go, it's a narrative, you can't do another narrative. All right? So you'll see what I mean in a second. The first here is going to be a narrative. All right. All right, the first is narrative. Does anybody know what a narrative is?
Like a story?
Yeah, it's a story. So, you are on a roll. Story or event or action. All right, so we'll just put in parentheses, Jesus does something. All right, Jesus does something here, right? He goes and does something. He's not necessarily talking. He's doing stuff. It says feeding the 5,000, which is one of the ones that pops up today. Feeding the 5,000, or in a very unique way. Here's a good example that I like is Jesus cleansing the temple. Remember, we haven't referred to it in this way, but when Jesus overthrows the money changer tables at the temple forecourt, or when he does that whole thing, When he chases in John, he actually adds, John adds that he chases people out with a whip. He makes a whip and chases people out. But when he does this, this is a story, right? This is a narrative. Jesus says stuff, sure, but it's mostly considered a narrative. Yeah, I think you're good to go, Jose. I also want to make a point on this one, since I've already brought this up, and I'll talk about this again. Make a quick note. It'll be an exit ticket question. It'll probably be a test question one day. Is that John starts his gospel, or John starts Jesus' ministry here. Right? Does anybody, this is the point of the chronology stuff that I'll talk about in a moment. How does Jesus, what is one of the last things, sorry, hold on. I don't know how I'm trying to word this. The cleansing of the temple, when Jesus overthrows the money changers' tables, does Jesus do that in the synoptic gospels at the beginning, middle, or end of his ministry? The end, right? Towards the end, right before he dies. John decides, I don't care about chronology and order, so John decides to put that same story at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, which is one of the things, it's pretty interesting. It sets up a lot. It shows that Jesus is like the prophet Ezekiel. So it is really interesting. Jesus is like the prophet Ezekiel in the way he does a lot of stuff in John. So John puts it first. It's one of the first things that we see Jesus do. All right, the next is going to be, we can also put, I'll also put under there is miracle stories. Miracle stories. If Jesus does a miracle, like turning water into wine, his first miracle, turning water into wine, goes here, right? That would be in a narrative. The next is going to be, in a little more space, discourse. Discourse. Conversation. Or direct teaching about or by Jesus. All right, we have discourse as well. This is we are in discourse right now. We're in conversation. So if you've never heard the word discourse, that's a good one as well. It just means that Jesus directly teaches something. You could say that when Jesus meets the woman at the well, this happens in today's passage as well, right? Jesus with the woman at the well, this is a discourse. He's directly teaching and having a conversation. Yeah, the story and the events matter, and they help set things up, but he's directly teaching somebody. So we're going to keep on going. Here's one I'm not going to spend time explaining because we've done so this semester, is parables. Guess what happens here? Jesus tells a parable, right? This one should be very, very easy. It's parable. It should be easy to catch at least. We should be able to, if you're doing an essay, give me some comparison in the parable to Matthew or Luke, right? How do those guys care about this parable? Or maybe you don't want to talk about that. All right, here's our final one. This one's unique to John, and this is I am, it's kind of the driving factor of John. I am statements. Does anybody know an I am statement when I say this? You guys with all your Nicene Creed stuff, I figured maybe you know this. I am. It's what? When Jesus says, the trick is that Jesus, so it's just Jesus saying it. Some people have asked me so far, when John says, I am this. No, it is when Jesus says, I am, whatever it may be, right? Jesus directly says, Jesus talks about who and what he is. All right. Jesus directly says, I am the bread of life. That one's going to show up today. I think it's chapter 5 or 6. I think it's chapter 6, actually. In chapter 6 today, so we get one of these, is he says, I'm the bread of life. Right? Quite famously is one that he says, I am the vine and you are the branches. And so we get each of these I am statements. There's 7 of these throughout the Gospels. This is one that I would really like you to do an essay on. These are very important. that Jesus is directly saying in the book of John. And the number 7 there is very, very important. So we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, that's our quick thing there. Now I want to talk the quickest outline that I can, or introduction I can, to the book of John. Again, this is probably my favorite gospel. There's some really crazy, weird stuff in here that I wish I had time to discuss. If I ever get them to let me do an elective class, we'll really look at the book of John, because it has bizarre stuff. All right, first is well, Jesus gets money from a fish's mouth. Yeah. So Jesus he needs to pay the temple tax, so he goes, "Hey, go catch a fish," and then they grab they go grab a fish, and then he says, "Yeah, open his mouth, and there's going to be money," and then he gets money, and then he pays the temple tax. And there's something that's really cool that's happening. He's also referencing, he's on creative mode. Yeah, he is the creator, so he's allowed to be. It's also directly like referencing and mocking a very, very niche religion that I just discovered that's what's happening pretty recently. That is really cool. But anyways, all right. So who wrote John? Unknown. Maybe disciple. Maybe a group. We think probably a disciple. We often say it's the disciple John. It's not John the Baptist. It's another John. We don't really know. I don't know how important it is. There are some decisions you have to make there, but we're not going to dive too far into that. What we are going to dive into is John has highest well, it doesn't say John wrote this. We just call it John and just try to determine. And tradition tells us the disciple John wrote it. But we don't actually know, right? So it's like, and I know people will be like, oh, who wrote this? We don't know. John has the highest Christology of Gospels. That's a complicated question. Change, not necessarily in the way you think. Sometimes we'll talk about that more. Oh man, I really want to I just want to spend the rest of the class talking about that. Not changing the way you think, but when we get to our next unit, our presentation unit, there's going to be stuff relevant for that question. So you will get to some of that. All right, John has the highest Christology of all the Gospels. Who knows? We all know what Christology is, right? I've talked about this before, so I hope we do. Christology is what we believe about the nature of Christ, right? How much we emphasize the divinity. John, right, emphasizes divinity of Jesus, constantly. All right. John cares so much about the divinity of Jesus. So when I say high Christology, what I mean is how much we care about the godness of Jesus, right? The fact that he's God. Mark has the lowest. It doesn't mean he doesn't care that Jesus is God. It means that he's not constantly shoving it in our face, right? It's that hidden Messiah concept that Mark has. Whereas for Jesus, or for John, Jesus is constantly showing up. He's saying, I am the Messiah. And he's doing signs that show this. So we have 7 I am statements and 7 signs or miracles. All right, we have 7 I am statements. And one of the things to note, the number 7 shows up constantly with John. 7 is the Hebraic, the Jewish number for completeness or fullness. So that's why he's putting the perfect number, right? That Jesus is perfectly I am, he is perfectly God. And it's also that these are the complete set, right? These are the big hitters of Jesus' miracles. So these numbers show up constantly throughout. And finally, actually, And I'll go ahead and ask this. What is Jesus' first miracle? Does anybody know? Yeah,
Wine.
water to wine. Right? It's that thing that everybody has an uncle that wishes they could do that, is turn water into wine. Right? So it is turning water into wine is this first miracle. That'll pop up in a little bit.
Mister, do you drink wine?
I don't like it that much. Sometimes, but not super often. So here's the last thing: is reworks chronology to show Jesus as Lamb of God. All right, this is the big thing for John. He doesn't care about the chronology of the others because what he wants to do is make sure you know Jesus is the Lamb of God. And what I mean by this is the sacrificial lamb that pays for sins, right? The Lamb of God is the sacrificial system that you have to sacrifice a lamb at Passover every year. So if you're remembering that, every year you have to sacrifice a lamb at Passover. And Jesus, in John, he is being super careful to make sure you know Jesus is the lamb that is slain. He is the sacrificial lamb for all time. He actually has Jesus die a full 24 hours before the others do because he's making sure you know that it's a specific time of Passover for all of this stuff. Not because he's saying they're wrong, but because he doesn't care about the chronology as much, right? The exact order of events does not matter as much as the events do for John. So we'll talk about that more. And again, you have to do some math to get there, which is the worst thing in the world, is when math enters Bible stuff. It's just terrible. All right, so that's all that I want to talk about. I want to give some quick instructions for what we're doing the next 3 days. The next 3 days, we're going to do 7 chapters of John each class period and for homework. So today, hopefully you did that. You listened to it or read it as homework because you guys are all great students in here. So hopefully you did that. If you didn't, you're just going to struggle a little bit more. I'm going to hand out an essay for you. You just need to give me a 3/4 to 1 page essay. You don't. The instructions will say, give me a research component. Don't need that today. Starting next class, we will. Today, I don't need that. Next class, I'll give you resources and stuff. But you're going to give me a quick 3/4 to 1 page essay explaining any one of these 4 gospel subgenres. I want to make a quick note. It is literally the exact outline we spent all semester or all last unit working on is the same outline that you should be structuring your essay on. So it should be very cool. It actually just was a nice. That's how it felt. Would somebody, if I print something, would somebody go run to the printer for me? You know how to use the printer? Who knows how to use the printer? Really? I'll let more than you know how to use the printer. Does anybody know how to use the printer? Yeah, you just scan it and hit print.
Well, Mister, the printer. I got you.
Right. So, yeah, I'm going to send something to the printer. Apparently I did not have enough essay things printed.